Need your daily fix of women's mixed martial arts? From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and one championship. Be in the loop, cause Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your fix on women's MMA. We've got you covered on Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel De Leon. Hopefully, you listeners are healthy, as the current state of not just MMA, but sports in general has been flipped upside down. Sporting events, whether it be football, baseball, hockey, or basketball related, has been suspended. There are NBA players right now who, because they are not playing the game, they're just figuring out what they can do. LeBron James, for the most part, if you follow his Twitter, it's just him sleeping. We got players like John Morant, De'Aaron Fox, and Devin Booker who are just streaming on Twitch, playing video games the entire time. We have sports organizations like the Phoenix Suns and the Dallas Mavericks trying to replicate their season, hypothetically, through video game simulation. So that's what they're doing. It's very strange, and this has never happened. Even the WWE, a pro wrestling show, has been undergoing complications with their live events. Their WrestleMania events is going through a refund process. It was supposed to take place in this giant football stadium. It's not going to happen. Instead, it's going to take place in an empty performance center. This larger-than-life event is not going to happen. It's going to take place in this small building, and nobody knows what's going to happen there. So, before I discuss any specific events or fights, it is noted that Americans are urged to not take part in any gathering that involves over 10 people. So, if you want to throw a small party of 10, if you want to invite all your friends out, or if you want to hang out with them, or if it's just you and your 4 friends, and you go to a location that has over 5 people there, then guess what? That's not a good idea, apparently. You can't do anything that involves over 10 people. So if you're the type of person who enjoys social communication, or if you're the type of person who likes going to an area where there are a lot of people, in this case, there are a lot of colleges and schools that are being closed down, or at least are being suspended for a while, because of the whole 10-person rule thing. Currently in the University of California, Irvine, that place is pretty much an empty graveyard. There's no one there walking except for employees or employers, maybe. You might see some person walk by there, but you're not going to see any group of people in the University of California, Irvine. That place is pretty much a dead zone. I got friends who attend that school. They're transitioning from physical classes to impromptu online classes now. There are organizations that won't even let their employees come to work because of this reason. At just a quick glance at any and every UFC event ever, there's obviously going to be more than 10 people. One of my friends who works at a hospital, and another of my friend who works at basically a cubicle scheduling job, they're pretty much not meant to work for the next month. They came to work earlier today, and were told, hey, this place is going to be closed down for about a month. And so they got sent immediately home. So there's no way for them to make up any money for the next month, which is a struggle for them because they got to make money for rent. And for the UFC, if you're not a top tier fighter, you need to find some way to make money through your career as an MMA fighter, because I have a lot of friends who make way more money than a lot of UFC fighters, and they're not even that major of a name really in their own field. They're just a worker. I got friends who are doctors and engineers. If you Google search them, you're not going to find anything, but they make 6 figs easily. They make a lot more money than the mid-card fighters and the prelim fighters for UFC events. So I feel kind of sad for the fighters who got their fights canceled, and they got to find some way to make up that money. But if you look at every UFC event ever, you got fighters, you got doctors, you got corner people, entourages, cameramen, commentators, ring girls, referees, judges, production crew members. If you guys have never been part of a live televised production crew, there's way more than 10, I'll tell you that. There's way more than 10. You got a production truck in the back that has about 10. We got building supervisors, we got security staff members, etc. If you look at Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao's entourage, when they get to the ring, more than 100%. So as of this moment, it is nearly impossible to properly set up any MMA event. So, UFC President Dana White has canceled the next 3 upcoming UFC events. UFC Fight Night 171, London, UFC on ESPN 8, and UFC Fight Night 172. Thank goodness Dana White gave official confirmation that UFC Fight Night 171 got canceled, which is surprising because he was so adamant about that event happening. I think Dana White does take pride with the notion that out of every sporting event out there, UFC is still doing its thing. They're not going to cancel. They're not going to suspend anything. They're still going to fight, even if it doesn't make that much sense. So even though for UFC Fight Night 171, even though there were 11 fights that were canceled, so pretty much you didn't know a single fight that was going to happen on that fight card, despite the fact that for months it was built to take place in London, but was decided to all of a sudden take place in America in less than a week's notice. Dana White was still assuring us that UFC 171 was still going to happen. With all the fighters dropping out of the events, there was even a chance we could see local fighters who nobody has ever heard of, who have never been signed with the UFC, who are not signed with the UFC, to all of a sudden appear in a UFC card. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine some dude is fighting in a local gym, and then like some representative from the UFC comes in and is like, yeah, guess what? We have 0 fighters for our next upcoming event. The fight is going to happen in 6 days. Do you want this money? Yeah? Can you imagine it happening? Because that is insane. And if it has to come to that point, then no matter what your pride says, that event should not be happening. Because the UFC should have the best fighters in the world, not some random locals. Unless, like, that's the gimmick of your show, like Dana White's, like Dana White's show or The Ultimate Fighter. Unless that's the point of the show. But if you're gonna be but if you're gonna make an official UFC event, and you're gonna have fighters who are not even signed with the UFC all of a sudden participate, it looks kind of bad. So, UFC Fight Night 171 was a mess, but there's a glimmer of hope right beyond that UFC Fight Night on ESPN 8 was still going to happen. Looking at UFC Fight Night on ESPN, which is next week Saturday, we had Francis Ngannou versus Rosenstrike. Who's going to win that fight? I don't know. That fight was either going to be incredibly boring or incredibly exciting with somebody getting knocked out in the span of just 1 minute. We had Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Assunção. That was Cody Garbrandt's chance to make his comeback after losing the belt, but all of a sudden he had kidney failure issues. We had Aspen Ladd versus Julia Pena. That card got canceled, and Aspen Ladd versus Julia Pena could have made or break someone's career in that fight. It's really disappointing, as there were possible title implications happening for all 3 fights. If Ngannou, Garbrandt, or Aspen Ladd were to score impressive victories over their opponents, then there would have been 3 potential brand new number 1 contenders in 3 different divisions. UFC Fight Night 172 had Alistair Overeem versus Walt Harris in the main event. Co-main event had Carlos Esparza versus Michelle Watterson. Both these fights, just like the UFC on ESPN fight card, would have really benefited the fighters and propelled them in a better position in their respective divisions. So those 3 events have been canceled, but do not worry. Dana White says that UFC 249 is still going to happen. We as fight fans have to hope and pray that we get to watch the long-awaited match between Khabib and Tony Ferguson. Along with the match between those two, we had the rematch between Jessica Andrade and the returning Rose Namajunas. That is expected to take place on April 18th at the Barclays Center. Hopefully, things become better. Hopefully, this pandemic reduces by the beginning of next month. But we just have to hope that things get back on track for both the nation and the UFC. If you've been following the NBA, there's a chance that NBA events might restart either in the middle or end of April, or they could restart up to August. There's a chance that WWE events could start at August. There's a chance that a lot of general sporting events or even organizations that have their employees come to work, a lot of them can come back to work, or a lot of those events can happen again. probably around August. It's really difficult to be a fan of the UFC when you are not sure of what is going to happen. So after the short break, I'll be discussing Aspen Ladd versus Julia Pena for a potential fight in the future, and more to come at the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast. This is Arnel De Leon, coming back after the short break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
We are back. Aspen Ladd versus Juliana Pena was cancelled due to an injury from Pena's fight camp, but even if the injury were to never happen, the fight still wouldn't happen because the UFC on ESPN event got cancelled. So it is expected that the two would have their fight rescheduled for future UFC events, so let's speculate on how a fight between the two would play out. I believe that these two are the perfect matchup for one another. I believe that both fighters can bring out the very best in one another, considering how they stylistically match up. Aspen Ladd is coming in as the favorite with 9 wins and 1 loss. Up until that Germaine de Randamie fight, Aspen Ladd has decisively been smoking her opponents. She's got a phenomenal ground game, and although her striking has a lot to be left desired, she's got a tough chin, and good luck trying to take her down. If you try to take her down, then good luck, because in all her victories over veterans like Tonya Evinger, Kunitskaya, Eubanks, she always finds a way to use her opponent's momentum in exchanges or sprawls to put herself in a better position. She takes people to the ground and she ground pounds them until they can't take it no more, and Aspen Ladd is very dangerous on the ground. But Germaine de Randamie recognized that Aspen Ladd's weakness was that she has a tendency of lowering her arms down in the beginning of a striking exchange. So Aspen Ladd, for the most part, is a counterfighter who isn't afraid to take a couple hits walking backwards, if it means setting herself up for a clinch leading to a takedown. Germaine de Randamie is in a whole other level as it pertains to striking. She's in a whole other level compared to Evinger and Eubanks and Kunitskaya. She looks much bigger than her opponents and even gave Amanda Nunes a problem in the striking exchanges. She is a dangerous opponent in the bantamweight division, Germaine de Randamie is. So I'm not disrespecting Juliana Pena, but I am sure that Aspen Ladd will have a much easier time counterfighting and taking shots by Juliana Pena than she would have if she were to be fighting Germaine de Randamie. So Pena, on the other hand, although lacks punching power in the stand-up like Aspen Ladd does, she makes up for it by going full throttle into her opponents, which is really fun. Pena is not afraid to dive towards her opponents with a flurry of punches and giving them no breathing room to relax. Both Ladd and Pena are at a similar crossroad, in that Pena was submitted by Valentina Shevchenko, another high elite fighter. But in her fight against Shevchenko, Pena fought with a blaze of glory. Like, if you saw that fight, she had no fear coming to Shevchenko, this world-class champion. She wasn't champion at the time, but this world-class fighter. And Shevchenko smoked her, and Pena had no fear coming into that fight, knowing that she could easily be taken down or dominated. Pena fought Shevchenko similar to how she fought her past opponents, with a high volume of strikes, then initiates for the clinch and tries to win with a ground and pound. She fights very similar to Aspen Ladd, except while Ladd takes her opponents down via counterfighting, Pena gets into a dominant position on the ground through being ultra aggressive. Both lost to top-tier fighters, and there's nothing to be ashamed about as it pertains to losing to 2 championship-worthy fighters like Germaine de Randamie and Valentina Shevchenko. For Pena versus Ladd, the story of the fight is who can successfully land their takedown first. Ladd is really good when fighting against overly aggressive opponents, and considering Pena usually initiates the contact and the exchanges, Pena would be fighting at Ladd's pace. But if Pena can overwhelm Ladd, and Ladd struggles to defend herself in the takedown and in the clinches, then she could walk away with her arms raised. I personally would choose Aspen Ladd winning the fight, as I believe Ladd has the tools and will come into the fight prepping up for when Pena tries to run at her with her high-volume jabs and a clinch battle. If Pena can land a couple good shots onto Ladd with some clean power shots, then Pena could disorient Ladd to the point where she feels really uncomfortable in the clinch game, to which Pena could go take down Ladd, and she could win the fight via ground and pound. In the end, this is a very close fight, and I'm excited to see these two potentially fighting each other in the future. If these two were to fight each other in a rescheduled bout, probably in a future UFC event, hopefully by the end of this year, I am sure Aspen Ladd would win the fight, but it can honestly go either way. It really could. Another fight that I was really excited for was Michelle Waterson versus Carla Esparza, because I knew that if those two were to fight, they would probably have the best fight of the night. And it's not me being ultra biased about those two, because I believe that those two are incredibly underrated. It's because those two have a very complete all-around game with not any real true weaknesses. So I always say Michelle Waterson comes into way too many fights being billed as the underdog, but she has no one true weakness. She's got a good stand-up game, she's got good boxing, she has good kickboxing, she's got a really great submission game, she can clinch, she can wrestle, she can do almost of everything. Her problem, though, is that she doesn't overly excel in any specific category, with the exception of maybe submission wrestling. But beyond that, though, she doesn't overly excel all that well, and she has a tendency of leading into way too much of a striking game, which sometimes works in her favor, but there is a obvious ceiling towards how good her striking can be. I've seen Michelle Waterson in striking bouts to which she can completely handle herself, and she can easily just outbox her opponents. But then you're going to see Michelle Waterson come into a fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, one of the best boxers in the entire UFC. Not just the women's strawweight division, but the entire UFC. She's one of the best ever in terms of stand-up striking ever. So Michelle Waterson, a really good striker, but when compared to a person like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, it's not even the same playing field. Joanna Jędrzejczyk is just overall more superior than Michelle Waterson in the striking game. And it was very evident when those two fought. I believe Michelle Waterson should have came to that game preparing to wrestle and preparing to and trying to go for submission attempts or trying to go for holds and clinches, and it just didn't work out that well. She did win for the clinch game, which at first was working out well for her in the first round, but by the third minute into the first round, Joanna Jędrzejczyk's clinch game improved dramatically compared to like her last recent other fights. Joanna's clinch game wasn't all that strong for a couple years, but over time she's developed it and became really good. It was very evident when she used it against Weili Zhang. So Michelle Waterson came to the Joanna fight with the wrong strategy and not expecting that Joanna would improve as she would in the clinch game and in terms of takedown defense. So Joanna Jędrzejczyk though, like top tier, championship, future Hall of Fame, women's fighter. Michelle Waterson shouldn't be ashamed for struggling against her. But Michelle Waterson, she's got a strong all-around game that could work against most people. She's got a good stand-up, she's got good wrestling, she's got good submissions, she's got a good ground game. She has all the tools to which she doesn't overly excel in one area, but she's still a really, really darn good fighter. And then you have Carla Esparza. If you haven't watched Carla Esparza versus Alexa Grasso, Esparza's tough. Esparza's really tough. She's sadly got the reputation for being known as one of the worst champions in UFC history. If you go on YouTube and you type in who are the worst champions ever in UFC history, Carla Esparza's name is right up there, and it's because she's one of the first ever women's champions. I understand that she got placed in a very high pedestal very early, very soon, and it just didn't work out well. She also lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk because Esparza's game at that time wasn't all that developed, and it would be very interesting to see how Esparza would react when fighting against a person like Michelle Waterson, another person who went toe-to-toe against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the stand-up game. Who would win out versus Waterson versus Carla Esparza? If you looked at the Esparza versus Grasso fight, Esparza's got a tough chin, okay? Both Waterson and Esparza are incredibly tough. They will go at it for 3 to 5 rounds, going full on throttle, not afraid to take any damage. The fact that Esparza was able to get out of a really cinched in arm bar against Grasso, then come out still fighting with a lot of energy, with a lot of volume, and was still able to win. That is tough right there. That is incredibly impressive. I've never been more impressed by a Carla Esparza fight than I have against Grasso. She's currently in a 2-fight win streak, so the momentum is carrying over for Esparza. I believe 2020 is going to be a really great year for Esparza, and if Esparza can defeat a really good opponent like Michelle Waterson, then it's going to do wonders for her. Then maybe Esparza can go up in the rankings and can possibly go and get back her title. That's what Esparza is hoping for. Michelle Waterson is not an easy opponent to go over. Michelle Waterson has fought the best. She's defeated so many fighters coming in, despite being labeled as the underdog. If Esparza and Waterson were to face each other, I have no clue who would win that fight. I would put my money on Carlos. No, actually, I'll put my money on Michelle Waterson, because in the Esparza fight, Esparza set herself up against Grasso in positions that she really shouldn't be in the first place. Michelle Waterson came to the Ioana fight with a poor strategy. She tried fighting one of the best stand-up strikers of all time in UFC history in a striking exchange, and it didn't turn out well for her. So after the break, we'll be discussing Jessica Andrade versus the returning Rose Namajunas for UFC 249. I'll be right back after the break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So we discussed contenders rising up in the women's bantamweight and strawweight divisions. So let's talk about two women who are at the cusp of regaining their strawweight championship, as Rose Namajunas is set to make her big return against Jessica Andrade in the co-main event of UFC 249. This will be a rematch, as the last time they fought, Jessica Andrade defeated Rose Namajunas with a vicious slam, and took her strawweight belt, which she later lost to when she fought against Weili Zhang. So both fighters are currently going through a redemption arc. People need to remember that when Rose Namajunas defeated Joanna Jędrzejczyk twice, there was a discussion on who really was the best pound-for-pound women's fighter in the UFC. The discussion was led by Chris Cyborg, Amanda Nunes, and Rose Namajunas. Namajunas defeated who many would say is the greatest UFC women's champion of all time in Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So, Namajunas was getting a lot of traction and a hype. I remember looking at UFC sites and a lot of MMA sites. There's a lot of promotion going on for Rose Namajunas. If you typed up Rose Namajunas before her fights against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, then right afterwards, there's a huge spike in terms of views. So she appealed to a large audience. She's young, a proven fighter who outstruck one of the best strikers in UFC history in Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So Rose Namajunas had a lot of hype following her. She had a lot of confidence in the world, and when you look at the first fight between Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade, Rose looked phenomenal. She looked great. Her striking was on point. Jessica Andrade, who is one of the most powerful and fiercest, hardest hitting strikers in the entire division, she could barely hit Rose Namajunas. Rose was tagging Jessica with a plethora of jabs, opening up her left eye in just 1 minute of the round. Jessica, man, she is a scary person. She is a scary woman, and most fighters would opt to wrestle with her if they could, because Jessica Andrade has a really good clinch and wrestling game. But even then, Rose was perfectly fine boxing Jessica, and she was decisively winning in the stand-up, and also in the clinching also. I remember a statistic that showed that by the time Jessica Andrade hit Rose with her 10th hit, Rose already landed almost 50 strikes already, and that was the beginning of the second round. Which meant Jessica Andrade landed up to 9 significant hits in the first round only. Other than Weili Zhang, I've never seen anyone outstrike Jessica Andrade the same way Rose Namajunas did. So nobody could have anticipated that the fight would end via a slam in favor of Andrade, because if you were to watch the fight, Rose Namajunas was doing really, really well for herself in the first and the beginning of the second. You wouldn't have predicted the momentum would shift over to Andrade. So even when Jessica Andrade slammed Rose for the first time, Rose was close at pulling off an arm triangle. People don't remember. People just think, oh, Andrade slammed Rose and that was the end of the fight. No, Jessica slammed Rose the first time, and Rose was close at pulling off an arm triangle. Then once they got back up, Rose went on the offensive. She landed a takedown and continued to pelt her with a huge deadly accurate jabs and some hooks and haymakers. Daniel Cormier, who was on commentary for that fight along with Joe Rogan, they were both marking out and were talking at glee about how great Rose Namajunas did in the first round. And I agree with them that Rose Namajunas easily won that first round. Daniel Cormier was talking about how it was insane for any person to think Andrade won the first round when it was obviously Rose. And the statistics show that Rose was the better person in that first round and dominated Andrade. One could have made the argument that Rose should have won that first round 10-8, or possibly would have won 10-8 if it went to decision. So Rose had an answer for everything Andrade did. She was outboxing her. She did far better in the clinch. She defended herself properly when she did get taken down. And then I really thought Rose was going to win that fight. Up until Jessica Andrade pressured Rose up to the cage for her second slam. And this is where Namajunas made a huge mistake. I believe that Rose Namajunas thought she was fine. If she were to get taken down again, I'm thinking how she would think. So I believe that if she believed that she'd be taken down again, Andrade slammed Rose in the first round. It didn't go well for her. So she thought, okay, so I got slammed the first time. I was able to position myself in a good position from the ground to get myself in a submission, to get myself in a position to do a submission move. Rose was really close to winning that fight via submission in the first round. So logically, if Andrade were to attempt a slam again, then Rose would do a better job in her positioning to cinch in for a submission, probably for a triangle armbar again. So when I saw Andrade go for the single leg, I didn't see Rose put any of her weight down on Andrade. Usually someone wrestles you on the cage. The person who is being pelted onto the cage would put the elbow down and, apply a little bit more weight onto the person's back to prevent so they could sprawl kind of in the cage, and then the person whose back is onto the cage can go flip over it, and then they can get better positioning onto the cage. The point is that you're putting weight down onto them, so you're tiring out your opponent. Rose didn't do this. I think she had too much confidence that she would be able to defend herself if she were to be taken down again, that she chose to not add any weight onto the back of Andrade. This allowed Andrade to lift up Rose Namajunas and slammed her down to her neck, winning the fight via slam. And winning a fight through a slam is such a rare occurrence that nobody would have predicted the outcome to have the fight end up like this. I give props to Jessica Andrade for defeating Rose Namajunas in such a dominant fashion. But let's not forget that up until that slam, Jessica Andrade was losing that fight, and I think both fighters are going to come into this rematch very precautionary. Both fighters lost their belt due to overconfidence. I think Rose took Andrade too lightly, which led to her making the mistake to allow herself to be slammed. When I say Rose took Andrade lightly, I mean Rose took her lightly coming into the second round. I felt like Rose was fighting nearly perfect in the first round. Then when she got to the second round, she felt a lot of confidence. Like, yeah, I beat her. I was dominating her in the first round. I believe I can do it again in the second round. A little bit too much overconfidence. I believe Jessica Andrade didn't respect Weili Zhang's striking game, which led to her getting knocked out. She believed she could go outpower, outmatch Weili Zhang. Jessica Andrade may have one punch knockout power, but she needs to respect her opponents a little bit more in the striking game. If Andrade never went for the slam and it was a pure striking exchange from bell to bell against Rose Namajunas, with the way how the fight was going, Rose would have won the fights. Andrade needs to stop setting herself up in a position to which her opponent can get off some clean punches to the face. If she needs to fight a little more smarter against Rose in this rematch, because if she fought as reckless as she did when she fought Weili, Andrade kind of fought a little bit reckless in the first round. If Andrade were to continue this reckless style of fighting, which may or may not work in some situations, then I could see her losing this fight. So I can't wait to see this. I can't wait to see what Jessica Andrade brings to the table in the rematch. I'm excited to see Rose Namajunas back in the octagon. I'm pretty sure it's soul crushing for a person to to be told that, you know what, you're the best in the world. And she fought perfectly, honestly. She fought as perfect as she could have in the championship in the first round against Andrade. She fought perfectly against Jessica Andrade. And Joanna Jędrzejczyk in this first fight and the second fight. But Rose made one mistake against Andrade, and that lost her the belt that she's been working her life for. And when I heard Rose Namajunas said that she doesn't enjoy fighting anymore, she said that she lost the desire and the passion to compete in the big stage of the octagon. This is nothing new. We've seen and we've heard fighters many times after a huge loss talk down about themselves. We've seen lots of fighters who feel very bad about themselves after a loss. Fighters like Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren, when they were on top, they promoted themselves as if they were the best. Then when they lost, they all of a sudden are doing these soft-spoken interviews and talk down about their own careers. Tyron Woodley and especially Ben Askren would go on interviews in the microphone before their loss and talk about how they're the number one fighter in the entire world, that they are unstoppable, no one can beat them, a whole lot of confidence. Then the second they lost, they went from, I am the best, to, you know what, I did my best in the octagon, and I'll try to fix myself up, and hopefully I'll do better. By the way, I don't like MMA. They all of a sudden just really dislike their own job. Whoever wins between Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade most likely will fight Weili Zhang, and whoever wins, you can expect fireworks to come out of fight. I would be excited if it was a Rose Namajunas versus Weili Zhang fight, or if it was a Jessica Andrade versus Weili Zhang fight again. These women have so much to gain if they win, and I can't wait to see what happens in the octagon when they do meet again. My prediction, I predict Rose Namajunas winning the rematch because Rose was for the most part winning in their first encounter. If Rose can dial down her mistakes, I believe she has all the tools to defeat Jessica Andrade. If Rose becomes too passive in this fight and struggles in her timing when she does her counter punches, then Jessica Andrade would be winning this fight. After the break, we'll be discussing the what-if scenario on what would happen if Cris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes were to fight yet again. This is the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, coming back after the short break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So we talked about Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade, two women's fighters who are trying to stake their claim as the very best women's fighters in their entire division. And speaking about the very best, let's talk about a female fighter who at one point was considered the very best women's fighter in the entire world, and that is Cris Cyborg. There was a recent interview that came out to which Josh Thompson believes that Cris Cyborg dismantles Amanda Nunes in the theoretical rematch. Alright, let's talk about the first and only fight between Amanda Nunes versus Cris Cyborg. If you don't remember, the build-up was intense. It really was. We had arguably the two best women's fighters in the entire world, with Cris Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes. At the time, you could have thrown in Joanna Jędrzejczyk or Rose Namajunas at the time, but these two were believed to be the number one, number two here. So after with Ronda Rousey gone, Cris Cyborg was believed to be the very best. She was the most scariest woman in the world. She had vicious. Honestly, with the way how people look at Amanda Nunes right now is the same way how a lot of people look at Cris Cyborg when she was at Strikeforce. She was this beast who would knock out everyone. She was always bigger and stronger than all of her opponents. But then when she got into the UFC, when you see how she fought, she was a very different Chris Cyborg. The weight cutting was a huge aspect to why we saw this version of Chris Cyborg. I believe we did not see the best version of Chris Cyborg into the UFC. I think the best version of herself was years ago, before she even came to the UFC. Now, although she did win a belt, which is a great claim, but it was considered that the division that Chris Cyborg was in was built around her. The entire deal was that Chris Cyborg was going to win this new belt in this new division, and she'll be the only good fighter in the division, which kind of came true. And the negative aspect about that is that the featherweight division pretty much non-existent. Okay, to be fair, there are women fighters in the featherweight division, but when you compare the featherweight division compared to the bantamweight and the strawweight division, it is very lackluster. And the reason why it is very lackluster was because the idea around it is for Chris Cyborg to be the only one that mattered in the division. Now Amanda Nunes, now she has 2 belts for 2 different divisions. The bantamweight division being the only one that kind of matters now. The strawweight division and the bantamweight division, those are the 2 main divisions you got to care about for the women's side of things. You don't have to care about the featherweight women's division, because no one there is highly ranked or touted that high or has a greatly big pedigree in them. So that was the negative side of things for bringing Chris Cyborg, and that you're bringing this version of Chris Cyborg, who's not the very best in the world as she should be, in a division that's lacking. I'm pretty sure no one predicted it would be Amanda Nunes versus Chris Cyborg. I'm pretty sure the prediction was Ronda Rousey was going to defeat Amanda Nunes. Then Ronda Rousey was going to go fight Chris Cyborg for a title versus title fight. And then from then on, you can build something from that. But because Amanda Nunes defeated Chris Cyborg, Cyborg was considered the favorite in that fight to a lot of fight fans. There was in the media on Twitter, and also I think on some journalistic websites, some journalists were talking about how Chris Cyborg needed to defeat Amanda Nunes because Nunes didn't have star power, which I highly disagree with. Nunes has as much, if not even more, star power than Chris Cyborg. Yes, she's not Ronda Rousey, but does that really matter in the actual fight game? Not really. So in the Amanda Nunes versus Chris Cyborg fight, Nunes came in really huge. Usually it's Chris Cyborg coming to the fight as the bigger opponent, who's just more dominant and more domineering than whoever she's facing. In this situation, Amanda Nunes looks significantly much more bigger than Chris Cyborg, and me and my friends and family were talking about this fight. We're talking about, oh man, who's gonna win this? It could be anyone. It made perfect sense for Cyborg to knock out Nunes and for Nunes to knock out Cyborg. I believe that Nunes would knock out Chris Cyborg within just 2 minutes of the first round. And guess what? It did happen. I was sure of it. I bet all my money to my friends and family that Amanda Nunes would knock out Cyborg within just 2 minutes of their first round. It happened, and I take pride knowing that I predicted that it would happen. And the reason why I said Cyborg was going to lose that fight against Nunes was because when you look at how Cyborg was fighting in the UFC version of herself, not the Strikeforce version, but the UFC Chris Cyborg, she became less of a power hitter, really. Yeah, she was still kind of was a power hitter, but she became less of a power hitter who's going to come in, be very aggressive and aggro you. Instead of being that fighter that a lot of people know Chris Cyborg for being for, Chris Cyborg instead became this very technical, counter-fighter-ish type of fighter, really. Chris Cyborg was mostly focused on like jabs and trying to like fight out of the pocket, trying to avoid some clinch fighting if she possibly could. And she fought a lot more smarter. Now, there's nothing wrong fighting smart. There really isn't. There's a huge difference between Strikeforce Cyborg and UFC Cyborg on how they present themselves. Cyborg was still being presented as the Strikeforce version of herself, where she could knock people out. And when I see Cyborg fight in the UFC against other women, I don't see that version of Cyborg. I see this a lot more safer, a lot more technical heavy Chris Cyborg. And so when she fought Amanda Nunes, I knew immediately that Nunes had the power advantage. Yes, Cyborg was a lot more technical of a fighter now, utilizing her boxing more often, utilizing strikes and out of the pocket boxing a lot more, but she still had some power shots. So if these two were just to trade power shots to each other, I believe Nunes would win out, and she did in fact win out in the end. And I'm talking about Nunes versus Cyborg yet again, because now that Cyborg isn't even in the UFC, she's in Bellator right now. I hope her career goes well there. There's an interview from Bellator MMA News Josh Thompson, a fellow fighter, says, I don't understand how people can say after one loss that you are not the GOAT of women's MMA. Chris Cyborg is hands down the best women's MMA fighter I've ever seen. If they fought again, I think Chris Cyborg just dismantles Amanda. No doubt. Okay, so thinking about this, is Josh Thompson right, or is he wrong, that Chris Cyborg is still the GOAT of women's mixed martial arts? So Chris Cyborg is one of the greatest of all time. I say that, but I'm also a firm believer that if you lose to somebody who is also in the same terms of, who's in the same sentence as you, or same discussion as the GOAT or greatest of all time, and you lose that person, then you being called as the greatest of all time isn't going to be warranted that much. It's like, so if LeBron James and Kobe Bryant were to face each other in the NBA Finals, it never happened. So far, LeBron James is currently in a higher pedestal than Kobe Bryant of all-time greatness, arguably. But if Kobe Bryant were to defeat LeBron James in the NBA Finals, if they were to meet each other, then, well, who really is the actual GOAT here? There's a reason why when you look at who's better, Kawhi Leonard or LeBron James, you have to think about that very differently. If you're saying who's the better overall player, it's easily LeBron James. Who would beat each other if they were to meet each other in a playoff series or in a game or 1v1? You would say Kawhi Leonard. And it's because of that reason it's hard to say LeBron is definitively the greatest of all time over Kawhi Leonard when Kawhi Leonard can defeat LeBron in a one-on-one scenario. So how can you say Chris Cyborg is better than Amanda Nunes when she couldn't beat Amanda Nunes? And when you look at Nunes, Nunes has defeated Valentina Shevchenko. She's defeated Jermaine Duraname. She's defeated Ronda Rousey. She's defeated Holly Holm. She's defeated Chris Cyborg. As of right now, you could say that Amanda Nunes is the GOAT. She is arguably the greatest women's fighter of all time. Now the discussion is, well, who really is the greatest of all time? It's either Amanda Nunes or Joanna Jędrzejczyk. That's the argument so far. If you were to say, okay, who is the most dominant women's fighter outside of the UFC ever? You would say Chris Cyborg. Who is the most popular women's fighter of all time? Ronda Rousey. Who is the most dominant women's fighter of all time in the UFC? You may argue Joanna Jędrzejczyk or Amanda Nunes. At that point, you gotta think of either of those two. I don't see that many people saying, like, who's better, Cyborg or Joanna. I'm not seeing that much discussions about that. And I think it'd be very interesting if we had more discussions on, like, adding Joanna's name to the wheel here, because if you're saying, okay, who had the better UFC career, you would easily say Joanna Jędrzejczyk because she's defeated more opponents than Ronda Rousey. But then again, there are people who say Ronda Rousey is greater because she sold more tickets. So the discussion of who really is the GOAT of women's MMA is kind of off and on, really. So after the break, we'll be discussing the aftermath of that is Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Weili Zhang. What happened after the fight and what's going on next for both of their careers. This is the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, coming back after the short break.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade. Expect that fight to be great. And another fight that has been great, arguably considered to be the best fights of the year so far, was Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk for the women's strawweight title. And as I am speaking about this, news came out over how Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Weili Zhang kind of had a moment when they both got to the hospital around roughly the same time, coincidentally. And they had a moment where Weili Zhang recounts how Joanna was crying a lot across the room or in the bed across from her. And Weili Zhang was talking about how inspirational Joanna was. Joanna went on to tell Weili Zhang to keep moving forward. It was a very heartwarming moment between the two fighters. And a recent interview came out when Joanna Jędrzejczyk was speaking with MMA Fighting, To which he says that, I know that the fight was very close. The fight was close every round. It was back and forth. I questioned myself during the fight, Joanna, can you do better? And of course, I'm going to watch this fight and see things I could do better. I am like this after every training. If the plan was good, I'm always like, no, it can be better. You can fix this and that and make this a different way. Probably after this fight, there's going to be so many ideas that I can get for the next fight, for the next camp. You can always do something better. I questioned myself in the fight, standing in front of Weili Zhang. You're doing everything you can, and you did everything you could. Physical, mental, and weight cut, I did my best. That's why I did so good on Saturday. It was not luck. I worked so hard. American Top Team head coach Mike Brown would like to see Joanna face Zhang in an immediate rematch. I don't think it's going to be an immediate rematch. Joanna is certainly open to the idea. The 32-year-old will be taking some time off, relax before she commits to her next fight. So will also Weili. Sure, why not? Jacek said on a possible rematch. If she's going to be the champ, why not? I want to face the best. I might consider doing this again. Alright? Right now, I just want to go home and relax. I don't want to think about my next move, my next fight. I don't want to think about the future yet. I need that time off to be myself, but I'm fine. I'm strong. I keep my head up. Of course, the expectations are very high, but like I said, it's not just about having the belt physically. I'm very proud of myself. My job is to be one of the best athletes, and I am one of the best in the world. Jacek is currently ranked number 4 in the UFC strawweight rankings, and widely considered to be one of the greatest female champions of all time. That right there is from an interview from MMA Fighting that is found on SB Nation. So, when discussing Joanna Jacek versus Weili Zhang, what else Joanna could have done better? So, I'm rethinking that fight there because a lot would argue, and it makes perfect sense for why a person would argue this, that Joanna should have won the fights. Joanna Jacek should have defeated Weili Zhang because statistically the numbers prove that she did better than Weili. But then again, the statistics and the numbers, that's just one aspect of the fight game, because statistically, Rose Namajunas should have defeated Jessica Andrade off her performance coming in the first round. I mean, from the first round going to the second round. Statistically, Rose Namajunas should have logically won that fight. But it didn't work out like that when she fought against Jessica Andrade. Jessica Andrade was able to win out in the second round with a slam, and in this scenario, it logically and statistically made sense for Joanna Jacek to win the fight. But from the judge's perspective, and Dana White always says it, and a lot of people always say it, you don't want to leave the result to the judges because you don't know how the judges are looking at the fight, because everyone has such different opinions and viewpoints on who really was the victor of a fight. Is the victor of a fight the person who did the most damage, or is the victor of the fight the one who's walking away with their arms raised? Like, who really won a fight? So when I look at Joanna Jacek versus Weili Zhang, it made all the sense in the world for either fighter to win that fight. I believe Joanna should have won that fight, but the judges scored it differently. I'm not a judge, so the way how I look at the fight is very different from how the judges did it. And in the last podcast episode where I talked about Joanna Jacek versus Weili Zhang, if you were to switch out those judges for another batch of judges, they would go score Joanna Jacek winning the fight against Weili Zhang. And if you were to switch those judges with another set of judges again, Weili Zhang might be coming out of that fight, winning the fight from the judges' perspectives. So, honestly, it could have gone either way. Joanna's talking about how she could improve better. And what were some ways that Jacek could have done better in the Weili Zhang fights? Well, you can't say Joanna should have hurt Weili more. There's that instance. I guess Joanna should have done better in the defensive end of things, but then again, she was rewarded with her very heavy offensive style. Because if she weren't as offensive as she was, if she wasn't as aggressive as she was in a fight, she wouldn't be laying down. Because you could say Joanna won most of the striking exchanges, because if someone hit you 5 times in the head, but your 5 times in the head doesn't equate to the same accumulative damage as one very, very heavy punch to the face, then really who did better in the exchange? If this is a perfect utopian world, I would say, Joanna, why didn't you go hit harder? But that's wrong to say, because Joanna is already one of the best fighters in the world, one of the greatest champions of all time, and she did all that she could. I don't think there was much Joanna should have done, or could have done, against Weili Zhang. If she were to replicate this performance the exact same way again against Weili, Joanna might be walking away as a champion. I don't think there's much that Joanna could have done to improve her odds against Weili Zhang. I believe that if Weili didn't swell up Joanna's face and made it look as bad as it did, as Joanna's face did end up looking by the end of the fight, the judges could have perceived the fight a lot more differently. It was just those power shots, man. Just Weili's power shots just did so much. Because when you saw Joanna, when she was doing like a combo, like a 3 to 5 hit jab combo onto Weili barely responded for the most part. Yes, it landed, and it stumbled her a wee bit. But when you saw, when Weili got hit in the face through a significant strike, Weili made a small, slight, subtle stumble, but still moved forward, compared to Weili Zhang, to which, when Weili Zhang were to, do a significant strike onto Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Joanna would go a little bit flat-footed, she might stumble a wee bit, and her neck would bounce back up. So it just didn't look good in front of the judges' eyes. Another way that Joanna could win this fight, though, I'm not sure if this would be the most exciting way to do it, though, was if Joanna Jędrzejczyk fought more passive and fought out of the pocket, fought a lot more out of the pocket, and didn't be all that risky. Yes, it's kind of a boring thing to do for a fighter to play very, very safe and play very, very passive. But if Joanna Jędrzejczyk can go and land a whole volume of strikes while at the same time be very safe and very protective, Jędrzejczyk might win that fight against Weili Zhang if they're to go have a rematch. Now, what's next for those two fighters? I'm surprised there's no announcement that Weili Zhang is going to take some time off, but Joanna Jędrzejczyk, for the year 2020, I think she's done so far. She laid it all out there, and she's already considered one of the greatest of all time, arguably the greatest women's fighter of all time. So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't see Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight again until next year. Weili Zhang, she can say that she can take a couple months off or a year's off just like Joanna, but she's a champion, and there's a plethora of contenders out there. Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade, I'm pretty sure that the winner of that fight would love to go get their chance against Weili Zhang as soon as they can. Especially, I say both fighters. Weili Zhang and Jessica Andrade rematch would be very, very great. We like to see how Jessica Andrade would handle herself in a rematch, to which she's not being ultra aggressive this time and putting herself in a position to which she would go get knocked out. It's kind of a dream fight to go see Rose Namajunas and Weili Zhang fight each other. Like, who really is better? Because we have Weili Zhang defeating the greatest strawweight women's champion of all time, and we have Rose Namajunas defeating the greatest strawweight women's champion of all time also as well. Rose is the former champion, Weili's the current champion, and it would make huge statements if either of those two fighters were to defeat one another, and we would know who is currently the best women's strawweight champion right now. The women's strawweight division is the most stacked division in all of UFC. So coming back after the break, we will now be discussing on who is the greatest women's MMA fighter of the decade, according to ESPN. This is the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, coming back after the short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
So I talked about how Joanna Jędrzejczyk will be taking a break from the sports, and I label her as the greatest women's UFC champion of all time. Now, it is arguable on who it can be, but ESPN They made a story on who are the best female MMA fighters of the decade. So let's go take a look on who ESPN thought were the absolute best. And we know who are the best in the general sense, but who is the absolute best? Let's figure this out. So from the top, we got Amanda Nunes. Amanda Nunes, in the decade of her being a fighter, she's gone 15-3. 10-fight win streak from 2015 to 2019. She's currently longest among female fighters in UFC history. She has 10 first-round finishes, 7 UFC title fight wins, tied for most among female fighters. I think second was going to be, who was second? Joanna Jędrzejczyk? Yeah. So, she defeated every former women's bantamweight champion, 12 UFC wins, tied for most among female fighters, 7 UFC knockouts, most among all female fighters. So that are all her accolades for the decade. Key fights, she defeated Miesha Tate, Ronda Rousey, peak Ronda Rousey to remind you, Valentina Shevchenko, current champion, and Chris Cyborg, who was widely considered as the best in the world at one point. So, Amanda Nunes, on top of being 15-3 or a 10-fight win streak, she also has defeated 4 women's fighters who all at one point were labeled as the best in the world. Ronda Rousey, the most famous, most popular women's fighter of all time. Chris Cyborg, widely considered the most dangerous woman of all time. Valentina Shevchenko, a current champion. Miesha Tate, a UFC Hall of Fame worthy woman. We've got 4 fighters here who are all very prestigious in their own way. Amanda Nunes has defeated. That is an impressive accolade there. She also lost to Kat Zingano, dating back to 2014, about 6 years ago from this point on. Though, Amanda Nunes, and I think, did Amanda Nunes get her win back from Kat Zingano? So, actually, no, it never really did happen. Kat Zingano so far has a victory over Amanda Nunes, and Amanda Nunes never got her rematch back. So that's really good for her. Kat Zingano, now, she's not been in a good tear recently. She's 1-4 since defeating Amanda Nunes, and it's very probable that if these two were to fight again, we would go see Amanda Nunes getting her victory in the rematch. Zingano has lost to Megan Anderson, really good fighter. She's lost to Juliana Pena and Ronda Rousey and Caitlin Vieira. Her one win in the past 5 years comes from Marlon Reneau. Hopefully things will go better for Kat Zingano. I really pegged Kat Zingano to be a title contender several years ago. Didn't really work out that well, but now we know that Amanda Nunes, she worked her way up from that loss, and she's been doing really well for herself. So Amanda Nunes, she's done really great in the past decade, really. Now we got Ronda Rousey, one of the more controversial figures in the history of the UFC. Her record is 12-2. She had a 12-fight win streak from 2011 to 2015. That is impressive. She won 12 fights within 4 years. Impressive. Headline UFC 157 with first ever women's fights on a UFC pay-per-view. I know. All 12 wins by stoppage, 9 by submission. She has 11 first round finishes. So in her, so she has 14 fights. She had 11. So yeah, 11 out of her 14 fights ended with first round. I remember there was a time period to which me and my friends and family were talking about Ronda Rousey, and we were all joking about how it's not fun watching Ronda Rousey matches because Ronda Rousey defeats all her opponents. And it really was out of nowhere when she lost to Holly Holm, because there was no signs pointing at all that Ronda Rousey was going downhill. You could make the prediction that, Hollywood caught to her and all her endorsement deals and movies, commercials, and her overall popularity in social media. All that have been increasing, but it never really affected Ronda Rousey. That loss against Holly Holm, just came out of nowhere, and people would have not predicted that. Rousey was the favorite to win that fight. It didn't happen. But also, Ronda Rousey holds the 2 fastest UFC finishes among female fighters. She defeated her opponent at 14 seconds and 16 seconds. She held Strikeforce and UFC Women's Bantamweight times, cumulatively together, including her reign as a Strikeforce and as a Bantamweight champion in the UFC. She has had 7 successful defenses combined, 6 UFC title fight wins, tied for most among female fighters, first among inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. She defeated Miesha Tate, defeated Liz Camacho, defeated Miesha Tate again, and then defeated Beth Correa. So people will talk about, so when people talk about Ronda Rousey's fights, they immediately bring up Miesha Tate. They bring up Miesha Tate. They bring up her being knocked out by Holly Holm. They talked about her comeback disaster against Amanda Nunes. And they talk about the hypothetical of what would happen if Chris Cyborg and Ronda Rousey were to fight each other. Even though both those women are not in the UFC and neither of them are champions, it would be a huge money match if we finally get to see Ronda Rousey and Chris Cyborg go at it. At this point, it's pretty much a spectacle fight. So would I still like to see it? Heck yeah. Would it be as good as it would be back in 2016? No, I don't really think so. But it's very interesting to know that Ronda Rousey truly is the most popular women's fighter of all time. We have Chris Cyborg, former UFC Women's Featherweight Champion, most wins in UFC's featherweight history, which isn't really much considering the featherweight division is pretty new. She had a 13-fight unbeaten streak in this decade, finished 11 of her 13 victories by KO or TKO. Former Strikeforce Women's Featherweight Champion, former Invicta FC Women's Featherweight Champion. She defeated Marlis Conan, Marlis Conan again, Tanya Evinger, Holly Holm, and was defeated by... I don't know why ESPN did this. So ESPN, they highlighted one of Chris Cyborg's key fights. Something that should be held in a pedestal. It was her losing to Amanda Nunes. That's kind of strange if you think about it. Oh man, Cyborg, she's one of the best. You know why? Because she lost to Amanda Nunes in a fight. It's very strange to prep over, but yeah, without a doubt, Amanda Nunes at one point. So while Ronda Rousey was the very famous popular girl, Cyborg was a scary girl that no one wanted to mess with. I'd say for the most parts of the 2010s, was the most dangerous women's fighter in the world. That's what I would say. That's interesting. Okay, so in ESPN, they are highlighting those three, but they're not highlighting Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So according to ESPN, Joanna Jędrzejczyk is not considered one of the greatest women's fighters of all time. I'm not sure how. Okay, yes, she kind of bloomed in the second half of the 2010s, but even then, let's look at Joanna Jędrzejczyk's accomplishments here. So she is considered the queen of the UFC Women's Strawweight division. Even though she's a one-time champion, she held that title for a while. She's had 5 successful title defenses, multiple performances of the night. She has had 3 Fight of the Nights. She has probably the Fight of the Year candidate here currently right now in 2020, although not part of 2019. She's had great fights against Juliana Pena, Claudia Cadella. She has the most wins in UFC strawweights history at 10. She has the highest significant strike differential in UFC championship history. She's had that with 1, 2, 3, 4. She has 4. Top 4 of the highest significant strike differential in UFC championship history. Not just women, but also men. She has the highest significant strikes thrown in a UFC championship fight. Second highest significant strikes thrown in a UFC championship fight. Most leg kicks in a fight in the UFC history. So she has the record for most and second most leg kicks thrown ever in UFC history. She's the first ever Polish UFC champion, first female European UFC champion, third European UFC champion. She, in 2015 and 2016, in multiple sports articles, is considered as the best women's fighter in the world. She's had great fights against Julia Pena, Carlos Esparza, Claudia Cadella, Jessica Andrade. Okay, even though she may have lost against Rose Namajunas and Valentina Shevchenko, those 3 fights were great. It's not hard to not watch those fights and not easily be impressed with what Joanna is capable of doing. So, now I know, according to ESPN, they don't see as Joanna Jędrzejczyk as a high heralded fighter for some strange reason. Wow, that's interesting to know and kind of sad. Yeah, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, one of the most underrated women's fighters of all time, and if you really believe that, I really believe that Joanna Jędrzejczyk should be in the same category as a Chris Cyborg, as a Nunes, and as a Ronda Rousey. So, thank you for listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps up. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Women's Mixed Martial Arts Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.